I don't want us to operate from a scarcity mindset. I want us to operate from a place of everyone has a spot. It just matters what you do with it. I started drag in Brooklyn, New York. I've been very blessed to work both in Manhattan and in Brooklyn. CHIQUITITA actually talked about this in a podcast interview that we had together. And she said the main difference between Brooklyn drag and Manhattan drag is that Brooklyn drag is a matriarchy and Manhattan drag is a patriarchy. So in Brooklyn, I find at least that femme of center people 9 times out of 10 are the people who are in positions of power or who are calling the shots or making the opportunities. And so there's a certain level of care and attentiveness to artistic practice that I'm not gonna say is absent in Manhattan or in other parts of the world, but there's a certain nurturing of creativity and difference and uniqueness. My name is Julie J. I am 27 years old. I am originally from Fort Worth, Texas, but I have been here in New York for 10 years this July, and I am a drag artist. I was a very shy kid, but very artistic as well. So I was involved in theaters from a very early age, and I knew that I wanted to be involved in performance. You know, my mom always jokes when I was a kid, I played Simba in The Lion King when I think I was in elementary school. It was a part of this summer theater program, and that performance was the first time that she ever saw me on stage. And I was fairly reserved, I think, as a child, and she saw that performance and she's like, who is that person? Or, you know, where did that energy come from? Where did that kind of power come from? And I've kind of found that it really only comes out when I'm on stage. You know, I think in my adult life, I've kind of learned how to harness it in my personal life. But from a very early age, when I was in Texas, through elementary school, middle school, high school, I just always knew that I was meant to be on stage or meant to be in front of a camera or acting or performing. And, you know, life in Texas was, I don't think that I have to tell you all too much about it, but it was difficult. You know, I grew up a young queer trans kid in rural Fort Worth. I went to Catholic high school, but I was out when I was in high school. I was an out teenager in Texas in the 2010s, and it was difficult. You know, I dealt with a lot of loneliness. As we say in the drag scene, it do take nerve to do what we do, and I've had the nerve since I was pushed out of the womb. My mom is very supportive of my drag career and everything that I'm doing. You know, she reposts so many things and she tags me in so many things. And luckily, my grandmother lived in New York, and so I always had a bit of a taste of what was on the other side. I attribute so much of who I am as an artist to her. She was an opera singer and an opera teacher here in New York, and she actually taught at my alma mater, Sarah Lawrence College. As a child, it felt like every summer I was here in New York and I was visiting my grandmother, and she was taking me to see Broadway shows. You know, she took me to see my very first Broadway show. One of the earliest memories I have as a child is being in the audience at Peter Pan, and she flew over the audience and sprinkled this glitter across the audience. And I remember sitting there and just being in awe of this magic that was happening in this space and in this room. And my grandmother, to me, like, I associate her with that memory because I think that she introduced me to wonder, right? Like the possibility of dreaming of something. When I first got out of college, I lived with my grandmother. I was very close to my grandmother, very, very close to her. But when I got out of college, she started to develop Alzheimer's. And, you know, now she doesn't know who I am. And it's very interesting, right, to like think about how there's certain people in your life that are so influential to who you are now that might look at you and, have no idea. My grandmother never got the chance to see me in drag. She never got to see the version that I wish she could have seen. My grandmother grew up in Texas in the 1950s and 1960s. And my grandmother used to tell me this story of, in Texas, we have the state fair. And when she was younger at the state fair,
on the grounds of the state fair in Texas,
there was only one day that she could go to the state fair. And it was on Negro Day. And that was the only day that she could go. How she so looked forward to that one day, that one window of joy that she had as a child. And I think that if she saw me now, that she would look at me and she would say, Julie, you found that window. You've kind of found the thing that brings you the most joy. And I think that she would be really proud of me. I think she probably would say I wear too much makeup. And that I probably don't need as much of it as I wear, but I think that she would be beaming ear to ear. She was always so happy to see me on stage, and that sense of support is something that I've always carried with me, particularly now. I'm like, the conditions were so hard for her to have persevered the way that she did. The conditions have been very difficult for me to get to where I am now. But she always approached it as, what I'm doing now is gonna make it easier for who comes next. The path that I walk now is gonna make it a little bit easier for the person that's coming from behind. And so I think that she would see me now and she would say, you're continuing this legacy of Black artists showing the rest of the world what possibility is. I didn't really have a lot of examples of queerness or transness when I was growing up. And so I always felt like I had to create the world that I wanted to live in. I had to be the person to say, this is what utopia looks like for me, and this is what it will look like for me. And the best way that I knew how to do that then was to write. When I got to New York, I just still had that inclination to create stories or create experiences that showcased this immense world that existed in my head. People always ask me the question of like, well, when did you realize that, did you know that this is who you were when you were younger? And it's kind of a hard question to answer because I've just always known that I was me. It didn't feel like I was something else, if that makes sense. And so my expression never lived in a place of, I'm different than this person or this person. It's always lived in a place of, this is who I am. For a lot of people, and especially for a lot of non-trans people or a lot of non-queer people, they think that we as trans people or we as queer people experience the world thinking of ourselves as like, oh, we're just very different from this idea that you have. But my experience has always been, I'm living life the way that it was given to me. Oh, well, when I first started drag, I didn't wear wigs because I could not afford good ones. And I told myself that I looked very polished when I did not wear hair. Hair has been like a very recent introduction into my style, which has kind of like unlocked a lot of new possibilities for expression. I actually really feel like my bald era is coming to an end soon. I feel like I don't need it. It kind of like being a bald queen, it kind of like forces you to rely on other things, right? Like your expression. A lot of queens, you'll hear them say like, oh, you need to emote. Like queens need to emote. They need to emote more in their performances or think about how their face looks. Well, for a majority of my career, all that I had was face. That was it. It was like face and then fashion. When it comes to my style, whenever I'm thinking of fashion choices, I'm like, okay, if everybody else is going right, then I'm gonna go left. So if I know that every diva at the show is gonna have a leotard on, no shade to the divas that wear leotards, but if I know that they're all gonna have leotards on, then I'm gonna wear pants. Because that immediately sets me apart from everybody else, and the audience knows she has a different message. My mom studied fashion in school, and she's always just the most fashionable woman. She worked at Elaine Bryant women's wear store, and she would always take us with her shopping. I always kind of like made note of what was trending, you know, at the mall in Fort Worth, Texas, which certainly was not the epitome of style and fashion, but it gave me a viewpoint, shaped my desire to play with different shapes and different textures and colors. There's a handful of performances in my life that have kind of changed the trajectory of my career. One of them was Sasha Velour's Nightgowns. I performed one of my favorite songs called World Hold On by Bob Sinclair. That song has meant a lot to me for a long time, since I was younger, because it was a song that was in a movie called Noah's Ark, Jumping the Broom. That movie and that TV series was one of the very first times that I saw Black and brown, queer, and trans people in media. In high school, like me watching that, it was like, wow, there's a world of possibility. Like when I was in high school and I would watch videos of Brooklyn drag, Nightgowns was like the show that I dreamed of being a part of. To be on that stage and to get somebody like Sasha Velour to give me a stamp of approval and say, you know, you're an amazing artist. It meant the world to me. Another performance that I kind of changed my life was at Bushwig. This past year when I won Miss Bushwig, and I did a performance of a Moses Sumney song called Doom. And I did that song because it was not too long after the death of O'Shea Sibley and DeAndre Matthews here in New York City. And that stand-up NYC that we did was for their memorials and for their family funds. I just remember feeling so overwhelmingly sad about the state of the world and having to organize and show up for these people who were just trying to live their lives. All of that life, all of that possibility taken away because of their sexual orientation or their gender presentation. It just made me feel so hopeless. And I think that a lot of people were expecting a very kind of like upbeat, bright, you know, this is Julie, she's like Miss Stand Up, she's very positive, you know, she's always trying to put out a good message. And that just like wasn't what I was feeling at the time. It really wasn't. And it's kind of become like this iconic image that's followed me for so long, this kind of like black paint and feeling consumed in like grief and depression. But at the end of it, still being able to find a little bit of hope. RuPaul says like, you can acknowledge the darkness, but don't stare into it. Because when you stare into it, that's when you start to be consumed by it. And so Doomed for me was like, what does it look like to stare into the darkness for a little bit? I do think of myself as outspoken, but I don't think of myself as preachy, right? And if I am preachy, the things that I'm preaching about are equal pay. It's like, oh my God, How controversial to want to be paid for the work that you do. Oh my God, what would it be like to go into a venue and be respected as an artist? That gets into the thing of be quiet, let's not talk about the things that cause conflict, because if we do talk about those things, we'll lose everything. And it's like, that's not how I want to live my life. I'm not going to live and make art from a standpoint of fear, right? Because that's not what drag is. Drag is not about fear. In fact, it's supposed to be the opposition to fear. It's supposed to be power. And so everything that I do is rooted in how can we remove the fear? How can we remove shame of asking for what you need, of building the support network that you want? In my Glam Awards speech, I say, you know, we always talk in nightlife, we always talk about the phrase booked and blessed. Everybody uses that all the time. They're like, oh girl, you are booked and blessed. You are booked and blessed. My response to that is always like, well, yes, maybe we are booked and blessed, but what does it look like to be booked and well rested? What does it look like to be booked and well fed? What does it look like for all of us to be booked and have a roof over our heads? When you say it out loud, some people hear that and they're like, oh, that's a little too preachy, but I hear that and I'm like, that's basic human decency, right? That's basic human rights. Those are things that we should want for all of us, not just for some of us. I shy away from the word activist. When you call someone an activist, it infers that you yourself should not be one. It just so happens that like there are a select few of us that are acting on the impulse that something is not right, or acting on the impulse that we should be wanting more for ourselves, right? Like every person in this room right now, at some point in their life has said, that's an injustice in this world. We really should be doing something about that. But there's only a select few of us that act on that impulse. To me, my activism is rooted in encouraging others to participate. It's rooted in getting other people to see that our collective liberation is the goal. It's not one specific group of people, right? When those of us who are on the farthest margins of society have freedom and have liberation, then it just will ripple back into the center of everything. Okay, we're all in this together. But I don't think that we have reached that point. We got a little bit more time, y'all. We got a little bit more time, but that's okay. I'll wait. I feel like it's gonna take a long time, but we're gonna work on that. So tonight's show is called Project. This is Project 3, so it's the third iteration of the show that we've done. I really wanted to produce a drag show that didn't necessarily have a theme. I always joke and say, like, we're in an influx of tribute shows. Like, everybody wants to pay tribute to something in pop culture. Recently, I've just been thinking a lot about, like, well, what if we paid tribute to ourselves? Like, what would it look like for you to pay tribute to who you are as a human being? Who you are as an artist, who you are as a maker. And so that's kind of how Project was born, and it also is the opportunity for me to share with other audiences, performers that I enjoy watching, you know, people that excite me, new drag artists, seasoned performers. I'm trying to create a legacy of sorts. I want that legacy to be something that's original, is intentional. The cast that we have is kind of like folks from all over the city.
Will y'all join me in being a part of the melting pot today? Can we do that together? So I'm gonna go ahead and get us started.
Julie is just amazing in general. She is the embodiment of New York drag and especially Brooklyn drag. The reason I love Project 3 is because it introduces people to so many different drag artists, and they get to reintroduce themselves and do something that they wouldn't be able to do on like a Saturday night in the West Village. Stand-up has raised so much money for different organizations and really just looks out for her community, which just makes us all look out for each other.
Julie is one of like the pillars of New York City nightlife. People use the word trailblazer. I like to use the word icon because I think it gets thrown around a lot for people who don't deserve it, but I think Julie really is. She is unbelievably selfless. She has raised so much money for causes around the country, and I don't know many other people who can do that. And what I think is really amazing is that she did a fundraiser back in March of last year. She thought she was only going to get a couple people, but it turned out like hundreds and hundreds of drag performers from all over the city wanted to be a part of it. And that's a testament to A, the cause, and B, who Julie is as a person. She's just the best.
I'm a very big Beyonce fan. And recently she was talking in the caption of her new album. And she said, you know, this new album that I made was born out of an experience that I had 5 years ago where I didn't feel like I belonged. You know, I didn't feel like I was wanted in a certain space. And I recently, post all of this success, you know, within the past couple of months, feel like I almost have been fighting harder for opportunities, that I've been kind of setting a standard of, no, we should be getting paid to do these things. You know, we should be getting recognized for our contributions to culture. And it's been nice to have been recognized. But it's also another thing to be a living, working artist and to feel that support. I want people to see me as an artist and as someone who used her voice when she was able to, when she had the capacity to. I want to be remembered and seen as someone who's respected, worked as hard as she could to make as much space as possible for queer and trans people in New York City, in the United States, and across the world, to try to make as much space for us as possible, to show us our potential, and to show that the world is out there, you know, and we deserve to see it all and experience it all as much as we possibly can. But for me, it was a chance to express myself, and that's what I'm gonna keep doing every chance that I get.